Well, I guess we'll go ahead here. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to buzz through this one really quick. Um, so he's talking about chapter 9, so about enclosed conduit. So that's square around any sort of thing. But this picture here shows a bunch of pipes that are obviously round. So if you go down into here, you'll find he starts between parallel plates, and that's fine, except you almost never really see that in practice, because what he gets into is he starts talking about the top plate doesn't have to be moving, and it starts putting flow through there, but the plate itself is infinite in and out of the board. He goes through and does a differential analysis on it, comes down and shows eventually, okay, you get a shear stress that looks like this 9.2, and you get a velocity profile that looks like this 9.3. So what this is this delta P term right here. I can't highlight it. I don't know how to. There used to be a way to do that. I guess I could do. Oh, wait. I don't know what happened there. Oh. So this term is essentially the fact that you have a higher pressure here and a low pressure here shoving the pipe water down the plate. The gravity is associated with, this term is associated with the fact that it's going downhill. This is associated with it's a high pressure or a low pressure. So what you get is you get parabolic motion here. And I'm not sure if he draws a picture of that. There you go. So there's this picture of that. So essentially, you get that equation back there is the parabolic motion. So this would be the velocity profile here. So that is capital U. That's a velocity profile here. This is the shear stress, which actually comes from here. I maybe can do the same thing again. And what you find out is this slope here is 0. This is the highest slope. So if this is quadratic or order 2, then this is order 1, because this is the case, mu du dy, and he doesn't really show it, but this is the y. Then he's coming up and saying this is the average of all of this. This is what you generally look at. This is not the actual what the profile looks like, but this is what they call, sometimes they'll call it bulk or something like that, or average. But it's essentially the average flow that you get here. So in other words, the integrate that area, you're going to get the same thing as the integration of that area. So this is all great. What you're getting out of this is basically that the profile is such that one, it's driven by a pressure difference, and two, it's parabolic. So here he's kind of got the same equation, very much in the sense that there's no gravity term pulling it down or up. So you get a different thing here only because there's no gravity. This term doesn't have the pipe going up or down against gravity. And so what you end up with is, here you go, the average velocity is a term here times the delta dp dx. So the dp dx, so it's not actually. So this is what's driving the flow. So here he's showing you could have something like that. In other words, if, for example, you had flow that came through a pipe, then what's going to happen in that pipe curve, you're going to have the velocity a little higher out here than you will down here because of momentum. This will be a higher pressure out here than back here. So what you're really, I don't think I assigned anything out of this section, but what you should get out of here, this thing bounces all over the place. Here, let me get rid of this thing again. You will end up with a term, which I just saw it a minute ago, but it ends up being this term, rho velocity diameter, or in this case, some distance unit A over mu, becomes the Reynolds number. And that's a basic term that shows up throughout. It's a non-dimensionalization that actually works through all of these. So the key that happens when you're looking at a pipe is the coordinate system changes. It changes from an XY to a polar, but it is also more reasonable. So you have something like this. This is the same thing. You get a change in pressure across this disk, and you get shear stress times the area here. You go down through the thing, you find the equation looks, okay, so you get a parabolic profile, just like you would with a plate, but this is not infinite. This is real in the sense that it's actually flow through a pipe. Pipes are everywhere, so this is more applicable to reality. You can take the average distribution, which is basically this distribution integrated over the whole surface of the exit or entrance. And what you'll end up with is a term down here that looks exactly like this. A little bit different, but what you find out, and basically it's for laminar flow, this flow rate is associated with a change in the pressure. In other words, if you had a pipe and you had a high pressure and a low pressure, it would make water or whatever flow through it. This term is essentially the driver. This is the parabolic profile that looks like this in here. Now, he should draw this down here somewhere. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he doesn't draw it. Oh, here we go. So you get the higher pressure and the lower pressure. This could be looked at as though it's very much like a circuit in a way. Here, let me kind of get both of these in here. And I'll go ahead and bring that up because this is large enough to drop it on the screen, and maybe important enough to want to drop it on the screen. Okay, got to get my keyboard out. I never got it out. This thing died on me this morning. Okay. Guessing it's there. Yep, it's there. Okay, so what you've got, think of it like this. This is kind of similar to current flow, and think about it like this. V is equal to IR. Well, it's actually a change in that. So if you look at it from this standpoint, pi d to the 4th 128 mu L under delta P. So now if you look at this being analogous to the current, because it's something flowing, that would not be, this would be a Q. And this being analogous to the pressure, you would have delta P equal 128 mu L over pi d to the 4th Q. This would be like a resistance. And so, believe it or not, you can treat pipes this way. However, this is a constant only for laminar flow. For turbulent flow, it's no longer a constant, which comes up later. So here's the thing, you have a low pressure and a high pressure. This basically drives the fluid from left to right. That's not the book. This is the book. So, he's just rewriting this thing with the delta P on the other side here. Well, okay, wait a minute, come on. How many times did I put that? It's kind of a repeat of the same process, except it's the complete Navier-Stokes and there's everything. And then I think he breaks terms out of it, and it should end up with about the same thing, which is this equation right here is the same as the one before. It just has a subscripts are like a little bit different, but the rest of it's all the same. And then he talks for a minute about the Reynolds number. Yeah, I think I touched that. And okay, so he starts talking here. As you increase the Reynolds number being for pipes, Reynolds number is rho, velocity, diameter. I put a box on this over mu. This is just a length scale for wind, our wings in a wind tunnel. That's different. For different shape, that's different. These are not different. These stay the same. So that D can change based upon what the problem, the geometry of the problem is. So in a pipe, what happens is the flow goes fairly slow. You get this, then it starts becoming transition, and then it becomes turbulent like that. And this is kind of a rough rule, but it's easily broken. And that is, for less than 2300, if there's not a disturbance in there, any Reynolds number less than that, it's kind of laminar. But you find it's really hard to get that one that low. Okay, what happened here? Okay. Okay, I have to go to the beginning again. So then, okay, so we'll just go ahead and cover this, although it's not critical towards any of the problems you got to work, but it talks about fully developed flow from an entrance. So what this is when the flow comes into a pipe, it's usually not parabolic right off. It sort of develops this, and it's got these little periods of influence that the wall, a particle right in here, hasn't been influenced by the wall enough yet. That's interesting. Yeah, okay. And so as the wall becomes more of an influence on it, it develops the parabolic profile. But if it's turbulent, it never develops a parabolic profile. It develops more of a flat profile. The reason that occurs is because there's a lot of momentum exchange and swirling happening, and these particles hit each other, So because of that, you'll find a little flatter profile here. There'll still be quite a bit here as far as the slope, and you'll find that the shear stress here is higher. In other words, for laminar flow, you'll get something like this. The derivative right here, the slope, will be lower than right here, which is turbulent, and the shear stress is much higher. When you get this little flat region, that's because particles can jump across this quite a bit. In laminar flow, all the particles are just going straight down the pipe. Nobody's bumping across lanes there. Okay, so you go down, let's see. I'm trying to get my way through 9 because 10 is where it mostly happened. Okay, so here he's talking about within a smooth pipe. Really, here's what he's talking about. You go in, you pick a spot, you put a probe in there, and what you'll find is a lot of fluctuation. If in fact there wasn't a lot of fluctuation, he doesn't have that. If it was laminar, you would see that through one straight line across there. And he shows kind of this unsteadiness here. If the velocity picks up and drops, then it's basically having to cross the different layers here. And that's what you end up with, is a flat internal core that a lot of momentum is exchanged across the core. And you end up with what they call a viscous sublayer, which is a little bit more well behaved in that region. And I think that's essentially almost all we need as far as the information to keep going into chapter 10. Okay, so we'll do that one. Okay, I think I touched it. Okay, for steady turbulent flow. Okay, so some of this is talked about last time. You got a viscous sublayer here. I mean, this is the same picture as before. I'm not sure exactly. So it turns out there's a profile in there that if you get really close to the surface of the wall, you won't get as much unsteadiness. But then you get a transition layer, and this is really very close to the wall. And this layer is one in which there's a little transition. This is out into the pipe. So think of yourself as being this the wall of the pipe. This is getting a little bit further out there, and this is basically the main core. And these equations are great if you're going to graduate school, but you can go back and look at those. So essentially you can see here he's got some terms. You put in an N and a higher N for this profile right here. It's empirical. It gives you a flatter profile out to the edge. So let's hit chapter 10 now, because that's the one where most of the information is, because you want to be able to analyze and design a pipe. Okay. So he's got a nice color-coded, that's quite a nice color-coded setup there. Pipes running everywhere, pressure gauges and everything. Essentially, what you want to be able to do is find the pressure drop in any of those, given a certain flow through there. And as we wait. Okay, so rough pipes and smooth pipes have quite a bit of difference in the way they behave. In other words, see if he gives you a picture. For laminar flow, okay, he comes up with this, he comes up with this quite quickly here. So other books take a little bit longer. So this is basically the equation that we're going to use right here. This one, not as much, unless it is purely laminar. But this is the head loss. Now, what is this? Where does this term come from? Let me get the picture. And let me put this in a context. Here, I'll just go in and drop it right there. And then I'm going to drop the equation right here and put it completely in context so you can see where these come from and what their use is, so to speak. I'll put that to the side and zoom in on it. So ordinarily, you would call this in and out. If you were basically to write Bernoulli's equation here, I'm going to write it this way. Okay, so I'll say this is location 1. This will be location 2. Minus losses. Okay, and we're in the real world now. And so if you look at it, you need to find some way of identifying and using an equation to find these losses. And it turns out that's it right there. F L over D, D squared over 2G, where L is the length of pipe, D is the diameter of the pipe, V, of course, is the velocity in the pipe, and F is a non-dimensional friction factor. And that's the key. How do you find that? Because I can look at the pipe and tell you how long it is. I can tell you this. I can find that because that's the same thing that is in this case. So how do you find the friction factor? Because if you can find that, you can solve the problem. It turns out for laminar flow, it's pretty easy. 64 over the Reynolds number. So if you look at it for this, that. But almost, I don't want to say almost never, but almost never, everything is friction. I mean laminar, it's usually turbulent. So the question is, how do you go about dealing with that? What he has here is a little bit of a strange way of doing it, but it turns out the pressure drop is a function of these parameters. So what they did is run a bunch of experiments, kind of setting up like this, and noticing this is the higher pressure here on the left, and this is the lower pressure here on the right. And if you just run a bunch of experiments and plot the result, what you'll get is something, okay, well, he's coming up with this. You'll get something called the Moody diagram, which is right here. And we'll see how you, okay. And so let's do a quick case so we can see how we can manage this. If I go in, snip the diagram, and drop it in here. Now what I'm going to do is try to actually solve the problem here. If I can get rid of these terms. And I'll put the Moody diagram to say right there. That's good enough. I think I could get in there and read off of it. It's not. No. Okay. Not perfect. But you know what I could do? I could get rid of all this. And take this. That would be a little easier if I did that. Yeah, if I zoom in, I think I'll be able to. If you get too close, you can't for some reason. I think I should be able to use this thing reasonably well. It's zoomed right there. So let's assume we had a pipe that was, say, diameter equal to 0.1 feet, length equal to, say, 10 feet. We're just going to say the velocity flowing through there is 2 feet per second. And let's say the viscosity is 2.3 e to the minus 5. And I guess I'll go ahead and say 2.34 e to the minus 5. And the question is, what are the units there? And if you ever get in a situation where you need to know that, there are two viscosities. This one comes into play from this equation. So the units here are pounds per feet squared. The units here are yet to be determined. Over here it's feet per second over feet. This is the feet. This is the velocity of feet per second. So you end up with the units inside this box being pounds second foot squared. This happens to be pound second feet squared. This happens to just be the velocity and the viscosity of water. So, okay, so we got that information, got all that information. Let's see if we can find out what is the pressure drop. If we take this, use this as the elevation, you'll notice that locations 1 and 2 are at the same value. Therefore, I can just strike those. I also know the diameter didn't change, so all the velocities, this velocity and this velocity and that velocity, all are the same. And it turns out this one being the same as that one will cancel each other. So then I can take my losses and move over here, and take this pressure and move over there, and I'll get P1 minus P2 over gamma is equal to L over D, V squared over 2G. Okay, so that being the case, then I can start inserting things. This is water, so this is 1.94 slugs per cubic foot, and gamma is equal to 62.4 pounds per cubic foot. So what I get is delta P over 62.4, that came here, come down there, equals to F, length of the pipe, I said it was 10 foot long, 0.1 diameter. The velocity in there is 2 squared. Let's make it 20 so it becomes more interesting. And then over 2 times 32.2. out of all this, if I can figure this out, then I can figure that out. And I have a chart, a Moody diagram, with this thing sitting right here. So the question is, how do I use this to find what value this could be anywhere in this range here? So obviously I need to know the Reynolds number, which is the same thing as velocity diameter, rho, velocity diameter over mu. In my case, those are the same thing actually. 1.94 times the velocity of 20, because I wanted to make it more interesting, 0.1 over 2.34 e to the minus 5. And I don't know if this thing. You can take does not like that. Well, maybe the typeset's too thick or something. Okay, 1.94 times 20 times 0.1. I'm getting around 165, 811. It's pretty reasonable. So if I went in here, I would go here. I'm going to get a ruler, make it perfectly 90 degrees, and 165 is what I'm shooting for. So there's 100. That's 200. 2 times e to the 5. So maybe about right somewhere in there. So if that's the case, then let's just assume that's pretty close to that value. So the question is, what do I do with all these lines that come across here? And in the book, he starts talking about this term, the E over D. So what this is, if you get down here, he doesn't, yes he does. He uses this concept, says it's a smooth pipe. And he points to this purple diagram here. So smooth pipe kind of implies that E over D is equal to 0. And what does that mean? So if you have a pipe that's exactly like that, that could be looked at as a smooth pipe. When you start looking at a rough pipe and zoom in on it, you might see, let's say you zoom in quite a bit, you draw a line as an average through there, and you look at the top and bottom. If it's rough, it'll have an E equal to a certain number, and that number won't be 0. If it's 0, then it's a smooth pipe. So the ratio, so this is the roughness of the pipe from that perspective. That's nothing more than the diameter. So it's a ratio of how rough it is to the diameter. So let's say we just, for this case, we have E over D of say 0.001. This is a case in point here. What we technically need to do is ignore everything except that one. And so what we do is we sort of follow this line over as best we can until we reach this point. Once we reach that point, Put this to a 0. And zoom back away from here. And take that dot. And you come across here. And there's your friction factor. You got to kind of look at this. This is 0.021, 22, 23, 24, and 25. So I don't know. 0.021 looks reasonable. I mean, you could basically argue 0.0215 maybe, or maybe 3. So we'll just take the friction factor equal to that. So now that you have that 0.0213, all you do is you put in 0.0213. So, okay. So, if you look at this thing, it's nothing more than, okay, let's see if I can get this thing to calculate. 0.0213 10 20 squared over 0.1 2 32.2. Then I've got that. So it turns out that that's 825.5 units on this thing will be pounds per square foot. If I want to, okay, I don't know, let's see, 825 by 134, 5.7 roughly PSI. So that's the delta P in this thing. So that's in a nutshell how you go through this. You have to use this thing. And this thing was generated years and years ago. I'm not sure how many years ago. Let's see. I should know that, but I don't. I may have known it at one time. But let's see when that was. It's like the 20s or something. I don't want to see any of that. Those are all fine. I want to see. There we go. They may have a good. Okay. Let's go to the reference. 1944, 1930, 33. So somewhere between 30 and 40. I think. This is the original article here. And there it is, the original article. Doesn't look much different than it did back then. Okay. There's a lot more stuff in here that actually probably supporting for that. But the other one is the Colebrook. One of the original ones too. And that's actually talked about too. I don't know what happened. Okay, so what happens if I do that? I'm not gonna do that. So he talks about that, I think, in the book. Let's see if he puts the Colebrook formula in there. There's the Colebrook. So that came out of that other equation. That is an equation of the lines on that, the curves on that diagram. You can see the E over D in there. However, it's hard to notice this right off, but you'll notice he says it's a transcendental equation, and that's because the F ends up on both sides inside of that log. Turns out you can get it so that it's only on the left side if you I don't think this fits the movie diagram as well, but it works. And so that's a non-transcendental formula. You can see it came out in 83. So anyway, I think we'll call it good right there. Come back and solve more problems than this. Look at the homeworks and see what those have on them. So I don't know if anything I said made sense. I almost put myself to sleep, but I don't see how people can sit in a classroom. Now that I'm sitting, this is tough.